I'm your host, Edie K. Welcome to our afternoon tea light. Very excited today. We have Rebecca Rosenberg to chat with today. Let me just read her bio for you guys. Rebecca is a lavender farmer, champagne geek, and award-winning author of 4 books. She fell in love with, it's French. I can't say that word. I think I ran into this on another tea light where I had an issue with pronunciation. Um, with Oh, I'm not even gonna try. She fell in love with wine in Sonoma, California, where she lives on a lavender farm with her family, and her book, Lavender Fields of America, was published in 2012. Since then, she has pursued decades of delicious research in the wine caves and cellars of France, Spain, Italy, Portugal, Argentina, and California. She is a champagne historian, tour guide, and champagne cocktail creator for Breathless Wines. Also, the author of the 2 books that we're going to be chatting about today, Champagne Widows and Madame Pommery. So I hope you guys are available here to chat with Rebecca. Hello, Rebecca.
Hi, Edie. How are you?
Good. I am so excited to chat with you. I had the opportunity to read your latest 2 books, Champagne Widows and Madame Pommery. And they're 60 years apart, basically, the time
Yeah,
frame.
they are 1800 to 1860.
Yeah. So one thing I thought was fantastic, these are both about widows. And you go in your books, you talk about why being a widow is important for the Napoleonic Code, which is an interesting part of legalese that really does affect everyday ordinary citizens. I don't know if you want to would you mind going into that?
Sure, absolutely. I'll show you a little picture. These are the Champagne widows here. And why are they widows? People ask me sometimes, did they kill their husbands on purpose to make champagne? But that was not the case. The reason that they're widows is because women were not allowed to own businesses or even any property unless they were widowed and had to support their families. So that meant that when husbands died, and they did quite often die because there were so many wars, like in the Champagne Widows book in 1800, there were 15 years of Napoleonic wars, and he killed 10 million soldiers. So that left a lot of widows in France. But the weird, funny thing is that it allowed the women to work and to do very industrious things that they otherwise would not be able to do. So that's how these certain women, and these are the 3 most famous that I showed you the picture of, and I've written 2 of the books, and I will write the third too. There are 3 different times in history where these women took the bull by the horns and they decided to make champagne, even though it was a completely male-oriented industry. They were going to do it anyway, come hell or high water. And I just love their stories.
Mm, that's fantastic. So at least with the first 2, uh, neither woman had made champagne to their husband's death.
Right.
So they are in not just male-oriented territory, but they are in new territory for them as well. Like,
Yes, completely. So you have in Champagne Widows, we're talking about this very famous champagne, which is Veuve Clicquot with that very famous orange, they call it a yellow label.
yes,
And
everyone knows it.
yeah, that's a very iconic label. You know, everyone knows Veuve Clicquot. And what does Veuve mean, Edie? You
Oh,
found out in the book.
I did. It means widow, and I
Yes.
didn't know that. I did not know that.
So
And it was
she was
exciting.
a widow. She was a young widow, like 24 years old, and
Yeah.
her husband died. We won't give that away. That's a spoiler alert, how he dies. But then she takes over the winery that they had started, and she blows it up into a giant company. All the while Napoleon is waging war with every single country in Europe, trying to take over all of Europe and be the ruler. And she
Yes.
even breaks the law to do that. So Veuve Clicquot, because Napoleon has made it illegal for her to export champagne to other countries, she hires an American ship and she ships all of her champagne in coffee crates and labels it coffee from Germany, Mannheim, Germany. And so I love that. And only Napoleon finds out when he marches at the very end of his horrible wars. He marches all the way to Moscow. And what does he see but Veuve Clicquot champagne? So they
Mhm.
have a little trouble together. And they fight through the whole thing. And it's really true that Napoleon knew Veuve Clicquot because he actually made her father the mayor of Reims. That's the major capital of the Champagne region. And he was on their board in Paris. So he really did know them. And it was, I loved writing how she fooled him and brought champagne to, she brought 100,000 bottles of her champagne to Russia.
Can you excuse me one moment? I
Sure.
deeply apologize. What can you show those pictures again? I just need to take care of something really
Oh,
quickly.
sure. Actually, I can get into them a little bit. So these are my pictures. I call them my inspiration pictures. So here is Veuve Clicquot at 20 years old, and she's smelling the grapes and she's realizing that she has a talent that no one else has, and that is called le nez, and that means the nose. And she actually has an exquisite sense of smell, and she uses it to make beautiful champagne. So, with that talent and being in gorgeous wine country, and here's a picture of champagne and how beautiful it is. And I have to be honest with you, I'm looking out the window right now to a view that looks almost exactly like this. So that is why I'm inspired to write about these women, because I live in Sonoma, wine country, and I look out on all the beautiful rolling hills and all the vineyards right in front of me. So Veuve Clicquot dreamed of creating her own little winery. And here's a picture of one of her small wineries that she started. But her big problem was this guy, and that is Napoleon Bonaparte. And they struggled together for 15 years because of his laws and his lust for power over Europe. And so that's a fun part of that story.
I gotta say, one of the things I found really interesting about Champagne Widows is that you bring in the magical realism of his, I don't know, demonic uh,
Yes.
driver, footman, companion.
Yes.
Uh,
Well, and that's what I was telling you before we started is that with Champagne Widows, I did some very unusual kinds of things. And so I really enjoyed doing that. So I never knew that I was going to have to write about Napoleon. I don't like war. I don't want to write about, that war history. But then I found out what an important giant role that he played in her life. And I knew I was going to have to write about him. So that's why I did these very small chapters, little stories throughout to kind of bring the reader up to what Napoleon was doing at the time. But it isn't dry history, right, Edie? It's
right.
a
No,
little, like you called it, magical realism. And I wanted to do that on purpose. So that wasn't part of her reality per se. It's part of what is happening to him. And I really think that this did happen to him, where Napoleon started out as a revolutionary in the French Revolution, and he really was for the people. But as he gained power, he called himself emperor. He made himself emperor, and he started to want to take over all of Europe. And so I actually did not create the character of the Red Man,
Oh,
who
you did.
is
I
Napoleon's right-hand man.
Yeah.
If you Google the Red Man and Napoleon, you will see that throughout history, historians and journalists talk about the Red Man who was always talking to Napoleon. And
Mm.
so, who did you feel the Red Man was, Edie?
I thought he was the devil,
He's
basically.
the devil.
Yeah.
He's the devil. But he exists. You can find pictures. I don't know if I have that picture handy here, but you can find pictures of the Red Man, and he's always the devil. And so journalists of the time were actually showing that the devil was sitting on his shoulder and turning him into this very bad leader, who was killing so many people. And I thought that was fascinating, so I did, when I discovered that Red Man, then I wanted to portray him in that more folkloric kind of way, because it's how people believed that
Yeah.
he was, whether
Well,
he was or not.
yeah. No, there's a really interesting biography of Alexander Dumas' grandfather, who was a general in the French army prior to the revolution and knew Napoleon as he came through the ranks and disliked him because he was so ambitious and he was so single-minded in a battle and had no strategy. And it's interesting because you get to see, because he's older than Napoleon, you see how they interact, and how Alexander Dumas' grandfather was very well regarded by the people. He was tall, he was handsome, he was strong, he was all these things that Napoleon was not. And it's interesting to see how they interact, and how it appears, according to this historian, that he kind of spurs Napoleon's worst instincts because of his jealousy. So I don't know. It's very fascinating. I gotta say, it's interesting. It's like an interesting companion to read for the background of
Oh,
Champagne.
I'll have to look that up. Well, Napoleon turns out to be quite an interesting character, I think, because his love for Josephine was so heartbreaking to me, because he just absolutely loved Josephine. He really couldn't live without her. And I include some of their true, like all the letters between Napoleon and Josephine are real letters that they wrote each other. And he was just in lust with her and in love with her, but he gives her up for his power,
Yeah,
because she can't give him an heir. And that was heartbreaking to me. And he marries a girl, a 17-year-old girl who he had never met, who happened to be a princess of Austria, and he needed Austria on his side. So he married her in a letter and met her and bedded her right away and had a baby 9 months later. And that was the purpose. But he continued. In fact, he did not even strip Josephine of her title, and he gave her her own beautiful, what is it, Malmont? Now I'm out of that Champagne widow mode,
yeah,
but he gave
yeah,
her
yeah, yeah,
her own beautiful castle. So, and he loved her till the end of his life. I think I continued that in the book, like the letters he writes her while he's in prison, because he gets imprisoned for being such a horrible leader.
yeah.
So he did touch me. He did touch me. Like, how does someone change from being so good to so evil?
Yeah. Man. Um, so along those lines, when you move over to Madame Pommery, so we do see a brief appearance of Veuve Clicquot, because she is an older woman at this point, and it is the one thread of magical realism that you bring from Champagne Widows. You bring the Madigo. I have no idea.
Yes, that's it, Madigo. So a
Madigo.
Madigo is an enchanted creature that looks like a black cat. And it's a true folklore in French history. You can Google that as well. And someday I might like to write a children's book about Madigot, tales, Madigot tales, which would be a lot of fun. But
Yeah.
what's fun is since I had that magical realism going with Napoleon, I thought it would be fun to have a little bit of that in Barbara Nicole Clicquot's life, and that is Champagne Widows. And so she has these Madigots that her salesman brings her to comfort her when her husband dies. And so I thought it would be a lot of fun if she would bring those to Madame Pommery to comfort her when her husband dies.
Yeah.
And it was fun because they actually lived in the same town. And of course, Madame Pommery was very inspired by her that she could do the same thing. If Madame Pommery or if Clicquot had done it, then Madame Pommery could do it. But her story is entirely different. Here's a beautiful picture of her. This
Oh, wow.
isn't that beautiful? I love it.
Yeah, and her sapphire dress.
Yes. So here is her champagne, and it's all blue. So she's all blue. And I love how these two contrast, because they're just spectacular together. And I will say, if you get to Champagne, these are the two most exciting wineries that you can go to, especially Pommery. Because Pommery, as you know from reading the book, later in life, actually all through her life, she's very interested in art. And so they still have major, major art exhibits down in the caves. We'll get into what those caves are, but down in her 18 kilometers of caves in Pommery, Champagne, they have a new art exhibit every year, major, major art exhibit. And it's so exciting. So
Yeah,
Madame
that's fantastic.
Pommery's story is totally different. So she is 40 years old when her husband dies. And the husband had actually retired from his business, but she had a late in life baby. And so she had a 2-year-old when he died, and she had to support her family because she had a son. She had an older son who was in law school, and she had this little baby girl, and she needed to support them. And she found that they were behind in their mortgage and that she really needed to work and do something. But her husband was in the wool and wine business. And this is a coincidence that both Madame Pommery and Veuve Clicquot were in the wool and wine business. And the reason for that is most people in the wool business, since they were going to sell their wool different places, they would just bring along wine because French people always have great wine. And that's why they had both of those businesses. So she didn't like red wine. It gave her headaches. And so she decided she would make champagne, which was completely ridiculous because champagne is twice as hard to make as wine. It takes twice as much money. It takes twice as much labor. It takes twice as much time to age the champagne because it goes through that method champenois. That's what I think the word you.
Yeah, that's what I stumbled over. Yes.
So method champenois is why champagne is more expensive. It's because it goes through 2 entire fermentation processes. So regular wine just does 1. So let's say you always pick grapes in the fall for harvest. And then during the winter, you lay them down and they ferment. And then in the spring, you can have a new wine. And then you'll lay it down for fermentation and it will get better and better over time. But champagne goes through that winter and then it gets very bubbly. The fermentation gets very bubbly and it kills all the yeast that's already in the wine. And they have to take out that yeast, which is really hard. And actually, Veuve Clicquot invented the mechanism to take that out. And that was a riddling table where she had a hole cut in a table, and it would hold the wine like this so that the sediment would drop to the bottom. And no man in 100 years had figured that out, which is kind of amazing. And they're still using that. They're still using that method today. It's called riddling. So it's called a riddling table. So it holds the bottle like this, and somebody will actually turn the bottle a little bit every day just to ease that yeast, dead yeast down here. And then in the spring, they will take out that yeast and they will add back in different flavors depending on what kind of wine they want. And so in Veuve Clicquot's case, she would add in a lot of sugar because she had a real sweet tooth. So she made super sweet champagne, and everybody who was making champagne made it really sweet. And what Pommery is known for is she was the first person who invented brut champagne that was more dry. And she said she didn't like it so sticky sweet and that you drank it like a dessert wine. She wanted to be able to drink it with hors d'oeuvres or during a meal or any time as an aperitif. So that's her big claim to fame. So Madame Pommery prayed to her smiling angel. And Edie, remember her from the book, The Smiling Angel?
I do. In my brain, that is not what the smiling angel looked like.
Well, this is the actual smiling angel, and it is on the Reims Cathedral across from Madame Pommery's home. And no one, of course, some people say, well, what part of this book is historical and what isn't? So this is an example of, I saw this angel. This is a very large figure. I saw this angel on the cathedral across from her home, and I said, that's who I would pray to. So, so I don't know if Madame Pommery did, but in my book, she does. And this is her, because she's very unusual. All the other angels are very angry looking, but she looks
or stern, or
yes.
Yeah. I will admit, I have never, as far as I can recall, never noticed an angel that was actually smiling.
No, it's very unusual. Yeah, it is kind of a strange smile, Margaret. I see that. It is kind of, but it's fun. It's fun to see that on the cathedral because they have thousands and thousands of angels on this major cathedral. They actually call this the Notre Dame Cathedral, and every single French king was coronated there. So it's a really major cathedral, and she's the only smiling one. So maybe she knows something that the others don't.
One thing that I was really surprised about, I mean, partially because I am not good at French history. I know a lot of English history because of my books, and I know American history because I live here. But I'm not great with French history just because it's I don't know. It's always just sort of escaped my notice.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the big swaths. Napoleon and the Revolution, those kinds of things. But and I knew that there was a third Napoleon. I knew that there was more than one of them. But I did not realize that the Prussians. I didn't understand that the unification of Germany was also sort of coincides with this invasion of France. I was really not aware of that political machination.
Isn't that why we love to write historical fiction? That we discovered these things, that we've never heard of before. And I had never heard of that either. But what Edie is talking about is that the Germany was in 25 different states. I didn't really even realize that. And Prussia was the biggest one. And so actually Prussia did a political move by kind of goading Napoleon III into waging war with them because they knew it could unite all of them into one country. So they created this war to a foolish Napoleon III so that they could make a major country around Prussia. And this was this in the book. We hope we're not giving too much away, but this was the Prussian general who actually moved into Madame Pomeroy's home. And this is
Wow, there he is.
Frederick France. So he went into her home, and so here she is trying to figure out how to make dry champagne, which is impossible. And
Mhm.
all of his Prussians and Germans soldiers were taking all the champagne, pillaging all the wine, and so she had to hide her wine. And I just loved how she handled this whole invasion. So what did she do? She went, and she didn't have any money. So she went to the city dump, the Ron's city dump, and she started excavating these caves, which are called crayères, underneath the city. And this is a picture of these caves. So she could hide all the champagne. These are racks of champagne here. And she would have a whole pulley system to bring them up and down. So how ingenious was she to do this right under the noses of the Prussians who were occupying them? And actually, that war lasted 2 years. It was a long war. It was a very serious war, and the Prussians and Germans completely surrounded Paris and starved them out. There's a part in the book where you hear that they had to eat rats. Everybody had to eat rats, and they had to actually eat the zoo animals, which is disgusting and horrible. And they were just without food. So another thing that I never knew, you've heard of Les Miserables, right,
Yep,
Edie?
yep,
And
yep.
everybody. So Les Miserables is from that time where the poor people of Paris were so starved, and everybody was so starved, but the poor people thought that the rich people were not handling this war well. And so they stole all the cannon from the entire army and pulled them up to Montmartre, away from where they needed them, and so that was the whole battle. I had no idea what that was about. I just knew that it was poor people versus rich people, but they actually stole all the cannons so they could not fight the Germans. So they wrecked the war. And we went there last summer. We
Uh-huh.
saw that spot where they pulled all those cannons. So it's
Wow.
fun when you find out all that good history.
Yeah, Margaret says, "Is this the 1870 timeframe?" And yes, so we
Yes.
were chatting about, both Champagne Widows, which takes place during, the first Napoleonic Wars, and so, like, 1800 turn of the century time, and then Madame Pommery, which takes place 6 years later, beginning in, like, 1850s?
Yeah, her husband died in 58.
58, yeah, um and then, it seems like the meat of the novel is like that 20 years between the death of her husband and, really getting the winery off
Yes.
the ground.
And what I love is that they were alive during the same period of time and that they got to connect. That was fun. And then, by the way, these covers are actual
Gorgeous.
wine champagne posters
They're just
from
gorgeous.
that time. So this one, this one where she's like a rocket ship, which is really weird because it was before 1900 when they conceived of this poster, but I love them. And this is the actual Pomeroy poster, and I've seen there's actually a carving of this poster. It's so beautiful. I love it. And she's leaning against a coupe glass.
Ah, that's fantastic. Well, and that was actually one of the other, great details that you can really tell that you are, not just a wine person, but a champagne expert. You talk even about how Madame Pommery chooses to serve her champagne in flutes rather than the coupes, um,
Yes. So
because of
this is a flute.
yes.
That's what we drink out of today. I don't have my other ones. I have one here. So each shape of glass has a different purpose. So this, they felt that it's keeping the bubbles right in this area, so they're not escaping. The coupe is a flat glass like this. I have some, but not here, but a glass like that,
Yeah.
so it's wide. And people like that because you could feel the bubbles and you could smell, and it's exciting, So those make a comeback once and again. And then there is a shape, this is more like a flute also, but there's a shape called a tulip that looks like a tulip. And that's what they actually use in France the most. They don't use flutes today. It just changes with time.
Yeah. Well, I
In
mean, it's
America we use flutes, but they use the tulip shape, or they'll even use a wine glass more than a flute. It's
huh.
funny.
Well, there is the apocryphal story of the coupe that it's supposed to be the shape of what Marie Antoinette's right breast, I think is what it's supposed to be.
Yes. Yes.
Which is,
Yeah, that's what I've heard. I've never heard anyone say it wasn't that, actually.
yeah.
But to kind of finish up Madame Pomeroy's
Oh,
story,
yes. Oh, is
a
this?
fun, yeah, this handsome gentleman, this is an older picture of Henry Vasnier. And Henry Vasnier started as her apprentice right when she started the winery, and he was 8 years younger than her. I think I've got that right. And he was a big surprise. Margaret, should I tell you a little spoiler here? So this is something that happens in writing historical fiction. I was completely finished with Madame Pommery, and then I led a tour through Champagne. And then I went to Henry Vasnier's fantastic Art Nouveau house. And what did they say? What did the historian say? But that he was her lover for 25 years. And I said, wait a minute, I've been working with Pomeroy for a long time on this book, like 2 years. And they've never said that they were lovers. And they said at their house, they said, oh yes, they were. And so I had to come back and include him like as a lover through this thing. And how did that happen and all that. So I guess they kept it pretty down low. But meanwhile, they built this magnificent Art Nouveau home that I talk about in the book. Yeah, I love Margaret saying, love Art Nouveau. I just love it. So if you go there, you have to look up. It's part of the whole Pomeroy winery. So if you go to Pomeroy, then you can see their house, which is really pretty. So the next thing, after the war, I won't tell you how the war goes, but after the war, she decides that she wants to build a winery, a spectacular winery on the city dump. And this is just one picture of the winery, and it is actually huge. And so I had to uncover the mystery of why she would build a Scottish castle, on top of the city dump in France. So that's where the characters come in, of her Scottish lover. So the Baron, not the Baron. Yeah, the Baron. I
Yeah.
get,
So
wow,
was he? Yeah. Was he a real guy?
it's so hard to keep in America, being American. It's so hard to know who are dukes and who are barons and what you call them. That was difficult to get all that
The
straight. Yeah.
aristocracy. Yeah.
So
Um,
he's made up,
okay.
Edie. He is a fictional character, but he's based in solid reality, in that Madame Pommery actually went to finishing schools in Scotland and in England. So all of that is true, and all forever. That was her whole education. And so she had friends from those places, and she really and truly built her beautiful castle in with that style. So she obviously knew what she was doing, so that was really intriguing to me.
Oh, it's fantastic. The other thing that I really enjoyed in both books. Oh, Margaret says, "Oh, we do enjoy a Scottish lover."
Yeah, why not? Let's have a good Scottish lover. And
Yes.
in the book, it gets to be a thing because she has to choose between now, and he jilted her way back when. So she has to choose now. Should she go with her winery or should she go with him and his castle and everything she always wanted? And that's one of the themes. I loved the themes in Madame Pommery. One is the kind of people that we fall in love with throughout our lives will be different, right? Because we have a different perspective and we have different desires. So when she met him in her early 20s, she wanted nothing more than to be this Scottish princess, But as she grew older, that changed for her and she had different interests. So I love that one theme. Plus that you got the theme, Edie, of and Margaret hasn't read it yet, but of the rules. So Madame Pommery truly had founded an orphanage. So she had an orphanage and she taught those orphans all the rules, all the etiquette, so that they could get jobs in the wealthy homes. And so that had all these rules in her mind, even though as a young girl, she would always break the rules. She had taught herself to follow the rules. And what she learns throughout this is that following the rules gets you nowhere in business. You have to break the rules. You have to dream up something around the rule in order to move forward. So I really enjoyed that theme also, to listen to your
Uh,
own voice rather than the rules.
yeah, yeah. And speaking of the rules, uh, I would love to know if Monsieur Wolf was real.
No, he's not real. So I needed he's entirely made up, not even based on anybody, but I needed a antagonist who would
Mhm.
represent all the struggles that she had. And it's more fun, really, if you can make them up because then they can embody all the worst traits, and be someone that you love to hate. In fact, if I have a protagonist or an antagonist, I sometimes will change that's based on someone real. I'll change their name probably so that it doesn't get me in trouble down the line or have people arguing that they really weren't so bad. Or I
Yeah.
did that with this book, which is based on a real story of the gold rush and the silver rush. And this is a real woman, Baby Doe Tabor. And the antagonist here is based on a man named Moffat, who really exists in Colorado, but he has tunnels named after him and buildings named after him. So I changed his name to Turnbull. so I wouldn't have to deal with the backlash of it all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a good way to make sure you're safe for sure. Well, one of the things to get back to Wolf, so I noticed that in um, both Champagne Widows and Madame Pommery, you have money issues as being really the largest driver of conflict. Um, I mean, aside from war, which is, admittedly a
Yeah.
large conflict.
Yeah, they both have war. In Let me think, like in Champagne Widows, Veuve Clicquot comes from a very wealthy family. So she has different money issues because she has plenty of money, but they don't want her to be running a business. So they would rather her marry a wealthy man and, go from there. But she wants to do this business. So then she has to do it on her own. And
Mhm.
it's actually less about money. I'm trying to think of where the money was, but it's less about money, but they want her to have a partner to keep her in line. They want her to have a male partner. So it's more about control. And the family, her deceased husband's family and her own family, they want to control her. So it's more about control than money per se. And then Madame Pommery, she needs to support. So when her husband dies, she finds out that they're not as wealthy as she thought they were, because he had a plan that they were going to retire to their little cottage and live a nice, calm life, and that they didn't need a lot of money. Well, she wanted to do a major business, so she needed money. So money is always part of every equation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it is a huge stressor, and that makes Monsieur Wolf as the banker the perfect foil for her.
Yeah. And he is a German. So Wolf, the banker, is a German. And what his motivation is that he wants to show his father that he can really make it in business. And he sees that this woman, Madame Pommery, he could really take over her business and make something. So
Yeah. Well, I gotta say it's very interesting. So what is the next one? I mean, I know that Madame Pommery just came out, and I know that putting a book out is so huge and it's such a big endeavor. But what's the other Champagne Widow?
okay,
Do you
I'm actually writing a different book right now, but the third Champagne Widow, I had a picture of her here. The third Champagne Widow is this woman here, and her name is Lily Bollinger. And what is cool about Lily, I want to read you her most famous quote. I have it on the wall. So,
Yes.
I only drink champagne when I'm hungry and when I'm sad. Sometimes I drink it when I'm alone. When I have company, I consider it obligatory. I trifle with it if I'm not hungry, and I drink it when I am. Otherwise, I never touch it unless I'm thirsty. So she loved champagne. And her story is going to be entirely different. What's cool about her, see, she's more modern. She's in the 1950s. And she
Mm.
made champagne super famous through her. Bollinger is always used in James Bond books and
Oh,
movies. And so it was like product placement. She had figured out product placement to make her champagne, Bollinger champagne, in those movies. And that was a big deal. So when you go to her winery, they have all these 007 posters and everything. And she becomes like a socialite. You can see that she comes over to America and she does press tours and everything. So that's a whole different fun story. But she has to deal with issues that these two didn't have to. So she has to deal with the everyone in France and around France started making what they called champagne, and it wasn't champagne at all. So that is when the law was created during this time that you could only call something champagne if it comes from Champagne, France. So she had to deal with that. She had to deal with huge riots and of the workers who weren't getting paid enough and who weren't treated well. And she was the only, Bollinger was the only winery that was not burnt down to the ground during that time because they treated their people well. And then they
oh,
had to
wow.
deal with, have you heard of phylloxera?
Mm-mm.
Phylloxera is a little bug that completely destroyed the grapes in France, all of them. And so they had almost lost the whole industry of wine and champagne. So she has a lot of exciting things to deal with too. So she'll be
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
I think I remember hearing a story going wine tasting that they had brought grapes over from France to seed in Napa, and then after that, they actually had to take a clipping back from California and bring it back to France because it was the only extant
Yes.
grape of that type. I can't even remember which kind it
Yeah.
was.
It's phylloxera is the disease, and it's really serious and it can happen. And yes, the Americans, they figured out that the Americans was resistant. The American grapevines were grape blight. I'm writing about potato blight, those little bugs. Yes, you're right, Margaret. So the book I'm writing now, though, is the sequel to Gold Digger, because this woman was the richest, most scandalous woman in America. And she had started as a young girl, like 20 years old, and she had come west with her husband to mine a gold mine, and he abandoned her when she was pregnant and she was working the mine alone. And then she meets an old prospector named Horace Tabor, who becomes the richest miner in history. And he becomes the Colorado governor and a US senator. And he, even though he's married, they have a huge torrid affair, 1880s. And he divorces his wife, which is a huge scandal. And he takes
Right.
her to Washington, D.C. and gets married in Washington, D.C. with the president in attendance. So they're a very scandalous, very rich couple. So that's this story, and it's a lot of fun. So I'm writing about her, and her name is Baby Doe Tabor. That's her real name. And they named their daughter Silver Dollar Tabor. And Silver Dollar Tabor became a burlesque star and a silent movie star in the 20s in Chicago. So that's what I'm writing right now.
That's fantastic. Well, and they always say that, oh, it's somehow modern to name your kid crazy things, and it just proves there's
Yeah,
nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun.
I know. Actually, her whole name is Rosemary Echo Honeymaid Silver Dollar Tabor. Yeah, and she was on the front, she was on the cover of Harper's Bazaar. You know, they were very rich. She had mink and everything. But the thing is, they lost, then there was the silver crash, and they lost their entire fortune overnight. So
Oh,
then this gal, Baby Doe Tabor, that's in the sequel, the history with her is she actually died, froze to death at 80, living in their mine, the one mine that they had left. So
whoa.
it's a very rags to riches to rags story. And then she has this daughter, Silver Dollar Tabor. So yes,
Uh,
the 18, Margaret, you are right on it, girl. 1893 crash. Yes, the silver crash of 1893. They lost all their money. And
wow.
they were like billionaires. They were super rich. I'm from Colorado originally, so or I went to school in Colorado, so that's when I found that fun story.
Yeah, all that fun fact. So, how did you end up in wine country? Like living, I mean, it's a
Yeah.
wonderful place to be. So, how could we all be so lucky?
Well, I moved here. I've been in marketing and advertising, so I moved here for a job. And then my husband and I had this place that we're in now as a weekend house from San Francisco Bay Area.
Mm.
So we could get up here in an hour with the kids and they could run around. So we have 5 acres here. And actually, this is the book you mentioned earlier, Lavender Fields of America. We decided it would be fun. This is actually our lavender fields, this front cover. We thought
Yeah,
it would be fun to change our whole life and bring the kids up here and start a lavender farm. And
that's
so this is our, I'll show you some of the pictures. So that's our lavender farm. And we actually started the biggest lavender company in the country, and it's named Sonoma Lavender. We had a lavender barn, lavender painted barn. So it was fun. We transitioned from the advertising business to being lavender farmers, and we
wow.
created all these products and went all over the country selling them for, in the gift shows in all the big cities. So that was a lot of fun. So then we decided we didn't want to live in the city anymore. This was heaven up here. And so we just moved up here and have been here ever since. We love it.
It's sort of like, in Madame Pommery moving to Chigny, or however you'd say
Yeah,
that.
that's yeah, she and by the way, that, in Madame Pommery, that Shinyi house is still there, so it's true, and they were going to retire there, so all those things, people ask you probably too, Edie, like, what is true and what isn't true? So I always say, like, the entire skeleton of this book is true. Like, if you're going to look it up, like about the Franco-Prussian War, or any of those facts, or who was at Madame Pommery's, or any of those facts, you're going to find out that they're true. And then what gets made up is like a character, that who is expendable, like the banker
Yeah.
or her lover. We don't know who her lover was, but she had one.
Yeah.
And so you have to make up some of those things.
So,
What's your favorite? Margaret says, what's your favorite lavender influenced drink, alcohol or not? Well, the easiest and best is lavender lemonade. And you
ooh,
can always add your, oh, my dog just like barked weird. Sorry. Lavender lemonade, which is really easy. You just take, yes, bankers are so expendable. Sorry, bankers. But yes. So you just put a few lavender flowers in lemonade and it's really yummy, but you don't want too much because it'll get soapy tasting. But it's good.
mm,
And I like French. I dream up all these cocktails. And if you follow me on Instagram and Facebook, I do cocktails, champagne cocktails every Friday. And I really
mm,
truly love champagne cocktails because they're lighter than drinking a full alcohol cocktail, which just kind of knocks me out. Like a champagne, just like Aperol Spritz, has the
mhm.
the spritzy, lighter side of cocktails. So that's something that I love to play with. And my favorite one is the French 75,
So good.
yeah, you like French 75s?
I do. I discovered them maybe a decade ago, and I mean, but they'll get you. I mean, that's why they're named French 75s,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
they'll get you.
Yeah. That's why I'm drinking water today because I went to a fundraiser last night and had a French 75 or 2. I think I had 2. So,
Oh,
but
so
cocktails
tell
are
everyone.
lighter
Yeah,
with champagne.
so can you tell us exactly what's in a French 75 and why it's named a French 75? I mean,
Oh,
I've
yeah.
got mine, but
Well,
I think, but
I wish I had my exact history in front of me, but it's named after a French rifle, like a repeating rifle that was called the
yeah,
French 75. And so that's what they named it after because it's going to get you like a repeating rifle would. And what
yeah.
goes in it is a little bit of gin, and you could use lavender in it. I've had them with lavender, or you can use thyme in it. Last night they did it with basil. So you can have
Mm,
different herbs to give it that little herbaceous, or some of the gins that they use are very herbaceous enough, and that's nice. So you just have a little bit of gin and lemon juice, and then the rest of champagne. Fill it up with champagne. So it's luckily, you could just do maybe even half a jigger of gin. So it could be very light, but still have that feeling of a cocktail.
I don't know who's Carrie Callahan. I don't know Carrie.
Who's Carrie Callahan, Margaret? Need to come up with a joint cocktail, Rex.
Ooh, another
Oh,
rate
a great historical fiction author. Does she do cocktails?
because I'm in. I want to know. I want to know everything about it.
Yeah. I might do a book because I've done tons of them. I probably have 100 of these cocktails, and of course that's been fun to make those, right?
Yeah,
To test those and make those and everything.
yeah.
And my friend,
Well,
so this Champagne Widows cover is actually the label of my best friend who owns a sparkling champagne winery. And if you want to look that up, it's called Breathless Wines. And it's all incredible award winning sparkling wines. So these are the people that I did the tour for and that I often go do talks with. And this is their actual label. So I love that.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. The only thing I had to add on your French 75 is that it's also for modern folk. The French 75 was the precursor to the howitzer, which
Okay.
if you go to ski resorts, the howitzer is how they do avalanche controls. So
Okay.
it's
Interesting.
person, so I don't, I have to get it to the way I can think about it. Like, how can
That's
I relate
good.
it to things I
You
know?
are a gun person or you're not a gun
I'm
person?
not a gun person. I
Okay.
don't know anything about them. I
Yeah, that's a weird thing that you have to get into. You have to get into so many things when you're writing historical fiction, right? That you never thought you'd have to. And
well,
in Madame Pommery, I discovered that both of those armies were just like the French army and the German army had different rifles. And the French one was more effective, and that helped them, but they were way overwhelmed by the German army. So just little things like that you have to get to know. So
yeah.
that kind of leads me to this. When I first got into guns was with The Secret Life of Mrs. London. And this is the love triangle between Jack London, Houdini, and Jack London's wife, Charmian London. And so Houdini does a trick, which is a bullet catching trick.
Uh-huh.
He was really the most amazing magician that ever existed. And he would have at Jack London's house on a Thanksgiving, he shot the pistol and catches the bullet in his mouth. And so you have to figure out, how did he do that? And what would that take? And it's funny. So I had to learn about guns right from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that is fascinating. Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
anything about it because I don't write uh fiction that would have a gun in it yet. So
Yeah.
maybe the next series. Yeah, they're just not gun people. I guess there is at one point there's a duel, but yeah.
Oh yeah, I did a duel too in Madame Pommery. So you have to. Did
Yeah.
you understand that, Edie? Did you understand the duel and what she did? We won't give it away for the readers.
You mean with the fact that they were the blunt sabers or
Well, they were sabers, but she made it so that the duel would not work very well.
yes, I did
Okay.
understand she was definitely engineering how things
Yes, she
were gonna
was.
go.
Yes, she did not want to kill her guests.
Yes.
So she figured out a way to kind of sabotage their duel. We won't tell you what.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we are actually at the end of our hour. It has been really wonderful talking with you. I've really enjoyed this. Feels like it was maybe the most informative talk. I learned a lot today about wine and champagne and guns.
Who knew, right? Well, thank you so much, Edie. It's been fun to be with you guys.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. So if you guys want to follow Rebecca, you can find her on Instagram and Facebook. And I'm sure you post those beautiful pictures that you had too on your Instagram. Because you have so many fantastic visual aids. I mean,
Yeah,
so
I love to do that. It inspires me.
yeah. Well, it's really amazing to actually be able to see the people, um, that I've been reading about, especially things, the General Francis and uh,
Yeah,
Henry, and yeah, just wonderful.
thank
Um,
you.
yeah, yeah. So when can we? So Madame Pommery just came out last week, 2 weeks.
Yeah, very,
Very
very soon on. I'm doing a lot of events and I do a lot of book clubs on Zoom. I have a whole PowerPoint with all these pictures. So if you have a book club, I do book club meetings for free. So you can just email me from my website.
fantastic. That is wonderful. And both Champagne Widows and Madame Pommery are on Kindle Unlimited. So if you guys are on that, you can pick those up right there. Other than that, I mean, it is money. So there is that. All right. Well, thank you so much, Rebecca, for being here. Really
Thank
appreciate
you. Thank you, Edie. Bye,
it.
everybody. Thanks for coming.
All right, you guys, I'm so glad that we had a handful of you here today with us live. And as always, these will be on our YouTube channel, which is just at Paper Lantern Writers. And you can find all of our author chats there. And I'm very excited about some new things that are happening for Paper Lantern Writers. If you are in the Bay Area on May 4th, we will be at the Bay Area Book Festival, and you will find several of us lanterns there. So please try to show up for that. We would love to even just chat with you and say hello. We've got a lot of books. So we'll see you next. Thank you so much.